is Dr Laura McAvinue and I work in the psychology department. So at the moment I teach advanced research methods, so statistics and research design, and I teach developmental psychology and educational neuroscience. So I teach a mixture of kind of research methods, stats-based courses, and then theory-laden courses, as I'd call them.
To start off with, it would be great to find out if you could tell us about the concern you had about your students' learning.
Yeah, sure. So, as I said, I teach a number of theory-heavy courses, if you like, and they're delivered in 2-hour lecture sessions every week. And what I found was that no matter how well prepared I was, no matter how interesting I thought my lecture was, or the subject was, I tended to lose students' attention if I spoke too much. So ultimately what I tried to do was to integrate the right to learn technique in order to increase students' engagement in the lecture session. So what I tried to do with each lecture is to design it in such a way that it becomes nearly a dialogue between myself, the students, and then the actual lecturing content, the material.
So in terms of actually designing a writing to learn activity, how did you initially go about it, or how did you, kind of the latest version of it, how did you actually design the activity?
Well, the right to learn activity, basically it's very, very simple. It just involves incorporating or providing the opportunity for brief periods of writing, informal writing exercises during the lecture period, so just a minute or two. And if you combine that with well-timed and well-posed questions about the lecture content, I think what you can do is basically stimulate students' thinking about the lecture content throughout, and therefore increase their engagement or maintain their engagement throughout the lecture.
Could you describe the activity or one example of it to us, and I suppose how did it actually unfold then in the classroom?
Yeah, sure. So basically, first of all, I think it can be used to stimulate curiosity about the lecture content, or elicit prior understanding or opinion about the lecture content, either at the beginning of the lecture or at the start of lecture sections, if you like. Then as the lecture goes on, I think it can be used to clarify thought or draw the students into the subject. And then at the end of the lecture, or at the end of a particular section, it can be used to consolidate their understanding of what's just being presented. So to implement the technique in smaller classes, what I actually do is I bring along a printed worksheet for all of the students. So the worksheet is very concrete then, you see, and it basically gives all of the questions that the students are going to be asked to think about, along with space for them to write their answer essentially. I find this is quite effective because it's very concrete and it's there for them and helps them engage. In larger classes, I think that's really not feasible, it's just too much photocopying to do and to bring in and distribute and so on. So in those classes, what I tend to do is just have the questions on my PowerPoint, and I let the students just use their own writing materials and to ponder the questions, if you like.
Very interesting. And I suppose for the smaller group, do you leave the worksheets, as we'll call them, with the students, or do you collect them after, or?
No, I always just leave it with them. So there's no sense at all of it being looked at or graded or anything like that. It's completely informal. So it's literally for them to try and extend their thinking about the material. So nobody actually ever sees whatever they write. So it's a completely personal thing for them, if you like.
That's very interesting. And I suppose what was your impression on how the activity went in your classes?
So my impression is that it works really, really well. Like compared to, say, when I started lecturing and I would do a lot of, what they call, I guess, the transmission model, if you like, in that you get up and you present the best lecture you possibly can, and you think it's great and you spent ages preparing it, and it probably is good. But I did find you'd look around and you see students' attention wandering. Now I definitely find that using this technique increases their attention during the lecture, but also their interest. So again, it's not I guess just about writing per se. It's about writing in conjunction or combined with these kind of clever questions about the lecturing content that stimulates their interest and prompts them to think. And then what they do is they make their thoughts explicit in the writing. So yes, I find that it has worked really well. I haven't asked the students in particular, specifically, what did you think of this technique? I've had some informal feedback, if you like, through the sets.
Yes.
I had one comment the other week, love the worksheets, smiley face. So I guess that's one person who enjoys doing it.
Yeah.
I think a focus group would be nice
Yeah.
to ask students. There's one thing I would bring up, that not all students will engage with it.
Yeah.
I think the worksheet definitely helps in the engagement because it's something concrete that they can actually write on, right? But in the larger classes, I do find there'll be a certain proportion of students that actually won't write, and now the majority will.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, Aoife. So whether it's that they are just not writing, but they're thinking, which is fine,
that's a possibility.
or whether they don't like the technique, I don't know. So that would be interesting to maybe have a focus group with students and just ask them their opinion.
Absolutely. So what was your impression then in terms of reaching the learning goal that you've identified? You spoke earlier that for you it's all about engagement.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely it helps to engage the students throughout the lecture in terms of their attention. So it makes them, to prompts their attention as you go along through, but also I think it's deeper than that, in that it engages them in the lecturing material itself and increases their interest and processing of that material. Yeah. So I would feel that yes, most definitely, this very simple technique, what it does is, very, very simply, it stimulates thinking about the content throughout the lecture session, instead of them just being, say, passive recipients of the knowledge coming at them, which then is, as interesting as I might think it is, it leads to them losing their attention and losing interest. Yeah. So I hope that they leave the lecture session stimulated and interested and remembering a bit more of the material than they would have if I had just kept going, giving my own presentation. So you can use it in a very quiet way, I find. So say in the large lecture theatre, sometimes you have the think, pair, share techniques, which are great for stimulating discussion among students and so on. But what I find in a large lecture theatre, sometimes that can lead to a loss of control of the lecture session to some degree. Students start chatting and then you're trying to bring them back, and it can actually lead to a loss of attention and a little bit of crowd control sometimes. So what I find is you can use this technique to increase interaction between yourself and the students in a very quiet way. So you can pose the question, give them a minute or two to write their thoughts, and then you don't even have to elicit feedback if you don't want to. You can actually just proceed, but you've still interacted sort of on an individual level with each of the students, and yet you've kept it a very calm, quiet classroom. On the other hand, so that's one way that I use it sometimes. On the other hand, if you want to stimulate discussion, of course it's excellent for that too, because you give them the minute or two to write, and then you let them pair, so their thinking has been made quite explicit through the writing.
Exactly.
Then you allow them to pair with the person beside them, to share, and then maybe to feed back to yourself. So you can use it in the two ways, and in both ways I think it's increasing interaction with yourself and with the lecture content. So it's this idea of a dialogue opening up between you, the student, and the material. And I think it really works.
You've continued to use this technique. So I suppose my final question was really going to be, would you use this again? So if you could kind of give us some information on how you've expanded your use of it.
Sure. I mean, to be honest, I only tried this technique out last term. I didn't come up with this, I started to read about the right to learn literature and the writing across the curriculum movement, and Bean has an excellent book in the library. It's just absolutely brilliant, and he talks all about the relationship between writing and thinking and improving critical thinking and extending thought and so on. So I tried it last term for the first time in one lecture, and I thought it worked well, reasonably well. Now I've actually integrated it into all of my lectures. You see, as I said earlier, I teach two types of subjects. So I teach the statistics, methods type subject, and then the theoretical types. And what I found was I always naturally, without knowing that I was using it, in the stats modules, from the start, I used the right to learn technique because it's kind of easy. You present some theory, and then you get them to implement the theory in a practical example through writing.
Yeah.
Whereas the breakthrough for me came with the theory heavy subjects, and that I was finding it difficult to find practical exercises, if you like, to keep the students going, keep their attention and engagement throughout the lecture, and I found that this technique works really well for that. So I've actually incorporated it now in a slightly different way in my more practical subjects and also in the theory subjects. And I find it works really well. At least it works for me, and I think it works well for the students.
Great. That's the most important.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.